What's up, fellow gamers? Phreak here. I am the design lead of Summoners Rift Team's live pod, here to talk about patch 13.24, which we will be locking tomorrow at noon, so for me in 16 hours. But probably nothing will change about these changes. We might cut something because there's a bug that we discover on Wednesday morning. We might pivot on a change or two, but it's unlikely. Here to talk about patch 13.24, what is in it, and just some other topics that are maybe worth discussing. So, preamble. First up, we intend to make a patch 13.24. The way it's going to work for us, if we do what is planned, is we're going to have a normal 2-week sort of stint from, it's going to start tomorrow or Thursday, and it's going to go on for 2 weeks, and in our heads, we could pretend that's 13.25. There's not really a 13.25, but from a our side live pod workflow perspective, we could pretend there's a 13.25. For you players, it means that 13.24 is only 1 week long, and 0.24b will come in 1 week after 0.24. This is not set in stone. This is not a guarantee, but it is currently what we're planning on doing, is to take one last look at outliers and move things around if needed. Don't expect, we'll just see. There will probably be some kind of changes in 0.24b, and this means that 0.24 itself will only live for about a week before getting a micro patch put on top of it, which will then last until the start of the year, 14.1, and the new update. Okay. Next thing I want to point out, so my social media blackout, not really what it is, whatever, but I haven't seen a Reddit DM, a comment reply, a mention on Twitter over the last 2 weeks, and man, this has been the best choice I've made in the last several months. Great for peace of mind. That said, I still go on social media sites. I was watching some YouTube content from, I'm gonna get his name wrong, Alois, the Dutch Riven one trick. He was getting a lesson on Fiora from the rank 1 NA challenger Fiora player. And I didn't know this was a thing, but apparently freak season is a phrase people use. And he was like, I'm going to show you some Fiora tech here, but keep on the down low. You know, it's freak season, whatever. I'm like, first of all, I don't care that people call it freak season. That doesn't matter to me at all. But anyway, this is to say that I still go on places like Reddit and I see what are the topics being made. And one of the topics I saw was some concern over, wait a second, is Riot doing a bunch of changes only because of Reddit outrage? And so I want to talk about that because I made a video a little while back around how we target win rates and whatnot, and it's more of a constraint than a goal. And I want to do something here as well to talk about hey, what's up with this? So I'm gonna sort of paint two extremes on either side, neither of which are real, and I think neither of which are good, right? So one, we literally never read community feedback, and we will just force every designer and every person who could ever make decisions to never read any kind of social media or any kind of player feedback. That's obviously a terrible idea. That's one extreme that we're obviously not doing. The other extreme is anything that is upvoted on Reddit we must do. That's also obviously terrible, and we also won't do that. So somewhere in the middle is the right thing to do, right? Somewhere between literally never and literally always, and the right thing to do is somewhere in the middle there, not probably in the exact middle, but somewhere between those 2 points, which both are wrong, but the right one is, debatably somewhere between those 2 points. So this means that when Reddit goes, I think X is good or X is bad or whatever, I can't believe there's no Yone nerfs yet. It's well, the fact that people are upset about a 48% win rate Yone means we should at least look at him at some point for how can we lower frustration, but it doesn't mean we should just nerf Yone out of nowhere. Or if players are very frequently saying things like, Zed has too much ability haste or he's too much of a caster or whatever, that's a pretty valid thing that we can look at and think about, right? Some things are very directed. If Pantheon players are like, my champ doesn't need a buff, it's okay, we could just not buff him instead. If Vel'Koz players think their champion sucks, champion might not actually be bad, but it's well, it might be a reason to look and see if something's going on. It's kind of weird, right? So yeah, in a lot of cases, it's no, we're not giving Riven armor pen because we're not, and maybe at some point there's a different line of thinking, and there's a really good reason that Riven should be good at killing frontline instead of being a diver who wants to try to flank flanks. Maybe. Right now, that's not the case. But if we're actually, we think it's important that Riven has extreme amounts of target agnosticism, we could just choose to say that. That's not what's happening now, but regardless is to say that, yes, community feedback is occasionally read, and sometimes the points are good, and it's actually the things you said here are really accurate. This is a good point. This can coincide with there's a bunch of threads on Riven also noticed that Riven's play rate has been decaying, and Riven, to be fair, had been a champion that we had brought up as a potential buff a couple of times throughout the year. We buffed her back in like March or something. Phlox did an AD ratio buff in the passive way back when, and I remember bringing her up around, I want to say like around August, roughly, as like a potential buff of a top laner that we could buff, because we're looking for like top laners to give power to, because we're using champion balance as a way to like nudge lane agency a little bit. Then the anti-snowball patch actually lowered Riven's win rate. And we did, a few rounds of like, okay, here's like 6 champions that got hit by the 0.20 changes. Then we did a few more afterwards, and it's like, I really think that Riven could be allowed to be here as a champion who's been falling down in pick rate. We were okay with her power level before, but we certainly weren't in a world to nerf her. And then it was like, okay, she did literally lose win rate in 0.20. She didn't get it back in 21 or 22. Like, we can actually just buff this champion. And, wasn't a whole lot of pushback. I had then looked into like, hey, what kind of things are true about Riven? Where is her agency? What is her power curve looking like? It's like, actually, it's probably better if we give her power that's shifted a little bit toward the early game, which mathematically is what happened. She got a slightly better early game, though she retained it throughout, the game to some degree. And it's like, yeah, this is probably shaped correctly the kind of changes that say, hey, you have more fair matchups as Riven, because as a pure melee champion, you probably shouldn't have really abysmal, pre 20-minute, statistics, right? So this is to say that, like, yeah, community sentiment occasionally is like really right on the money for what kind of things are actually frustrating, and occasionally they're really wrong, and occasionally it's like the same 5 people making the same Reddit thread every week until one gets upvoted, and it's like, I'm gonna keep ignoring you, right? Like, all this above happens, and it's our jobs to like comb through this to a certain degree, not all of it, but to comb through it to a certain degree, and take inspiration here. So I urge you to, yes, keep giving feedback, try to be productive, again, try to deliver better feedback than my champion sucks. When you say there's a bug, make sure that bug actually exists. Those both help, because if like, if some community of players keeps yelling and they're wrong about things they're yelling about, I will just ignore that community of players and just close myself off from that kind of feedback. Like, that will just happen. So anyway, let's move on. And I want to talk about one more topic, which is that there's really more than 2, but I want to talk about 2 kinds of balance changes. So this is sort of similar to what I was talking about 2 weeks ago with how it's the live pod and not the balance team or whatever. But it's still along those lines, which is there are, broadly speaking, 2 kinds of changes, I think, that are worth bringing attention to. I think I want to kind of just illustrate, I guess, about. So one is we think the overall kit is shaped correctly, and it's just, yeah, dude, this change is -2 AD because it's the freest lever. It's like, this champ is fine. We just think the win rate's a little bit too high. We're happy with all the shapes here. Like, the durability is good. The power level in various roles is fine. Like, the builds are in a good stage. It's like, it's just -3 AD. It's like, here's -3 AD. Here's like 2 armor or something, or like 5 damage off Q. It's just like, we're just trying to find 1% win rate because like this champion just like wins a little bit too much. Like, they're the appropriate level of fair. They're like a little frustrating, but like a lot of champions are when they're strong. Like, whatever. And it's just like, here's just a change, right? And I think we should be very willing to do those, and they're going to be unexciting. They're certainly unexciting as buffs, but sometimes champions don't need a weakness carved out. I'll keep using Vel'Koz as an example. We are making some Vel'Koz changes, but it's like, it could be that Vel'Koz has the appropriate weaknesses and should be very, very bad into melee champions. Now, there might be bugs that are completely worth fixing and that we should absolutely fix, but it could be that, like, actually, so I looked at a bunch of Vel'Koz data, for example, in point 23, and what I saw was that if you compared Vel'Koz to other artillery mages in the same role, so using Xerath and Zoe as obvious side grade stand-ins here, Vel'Koz's total damage was pretty close to those two, but was way, way, way worse at securing kills. So it meant that, like, well, he has pretty good poke, but like, he doesn't actually have good finishing power. He doesn't actually secure the kills very often. And from what I can tell from 13.23 data, he got like a 30% or so pick rate increase, which is pretty good for a 1% win rate buff to get 30% more plays on the patch. And it really shot up his ability to secure kills. His kills per game went up pretty meaningfully to where he was much more comparable to Xerath, just by saying, yeah, when you do land burst, that burst is more often enough to finish the kill. It also, these changes ended up being more mid lane skewed than support skewed. So even though they were very simple changes and it's like, here's some damage, I would argue that power level wise, the thing Vel'Koz actually was missing the most was the self synergy burst to finish his own kills. And again, like, what I measured was like pretty promising, that like his win rates went up in the right places. And he had a meaningful pick rate increase, and a lot of the data I can look at, his statistical performances are like, these are much better. He's not lagging behind other artillery mages. That's a good thing. Now, to be fair, Xerath still wins far more games than Vel'Koz does, and it could be that Vel'Koz should actually be a 52% win rate mid laner, and that's what's going to make him feel like a functional champion when his skills are very unreliable. Or it could be that Vel'Koz should be more reliable, and with the same like total power level or less total damage, is a more fulfilling champion by being more reliable. But that goes into the second kind of change, which is many changes are there to achieve a more specific goal. This could be to let Ryze not be a 44% win rate mid laner who's bound to pro play. This could be to shift Kassante's power budget from his Q into his W, because that spell is much more fair and makes him much sharper in matchups, so he can't, wash weak matchups, and he's no longer a safe blind pick, and you've got to wait and make sure that Gwen and Jax just aren't on the screen or possible to be picked if you're going to pick him, and then suddenly we get to, actually balance him around solo queue a bit more than just pro play, where he's a 45% win rate silver champion. Right? He doesn't, so he doesn't get Ryzed. Ryze is the poster child for this kind of stuff. Not that champions can't be elite skewed. We have champions like Zoe and Nidalee and Callista and Draven who are balanced around their high MMR win rates, and that's just always going to be the case because they are high MMR skewed, and there's lots of things around champion mastery and game pacing that will not let them be successful in low elo without doing some very specific things around making them easy. Maybe Caitlyn is the one low elo lane bully, and that means we have to reduce more optimizations around her because we know being a lane bully is already high elo skewed. This means we're going to make Caitlyn really, really, very straightforward and have no optimizations, and that might hurt some players, and it might not be worth doing, but now we're into a product call. What's correct for League of Legends? Should the, supporting cast of Arcane be easily approached for new League of Legends players and very easy to play, and I'm sorry, we're going to remove every single combo available? That's not my call, to be clear, but the kind of thing that we could choose to do, and it would be a different kind of balance change. All this to say that... I think it's good if we try on our side to do a good job of explaining what is +3 AD, and one is actually we see a flaw here in what's being done, and players are, the intuitive build is not the correct build, or this is a way to shift power around or to fix, performance by MMR or performance by role or whatever else, or build optimizations or all kinds of stuff. So that's the entire secondary kind of change here. For what it's worth, 13.24, this patch is meant to be heavily or more heavily into the second kind, where we're trying to say, yeah, okay, these are going to be, to be fair, there's actually a lot of buffs. This is a pretty buff heavy patch. This is a power creep patch. But it's to try much harder to say, okay, if we're doing any changes at all, let's try to really drive home that they're directionally the right things, and go in that direction. So let's talk about what is in the patch and also what went into the last patch. So let's talk about how the last patch went. Up first, we had changes to Trundle. We buffed him. Trundle has one of the shallowest mastery curves in League of Legends. He is maybe the easiest to play top laner. He might rival Garen. I think he might be flatter than Garen in this regard. So being a basically introductory, very easy to play top laner means this is the kind of champion that should actually observe a very high win rate in low MMR. This just should be true that Trundle, who has, I would say, relatively moderately easy counterplay, means that the counterplay is, fairly easily accessed in, Diamond or something, not as easily accessed in Silver, but also champion's easy to play. So the average Trundle player is essentially closer to the top of the mastery curve than the average Jax or Camille or Riven player. So you should expect to see Trundle be extremely performant in Bronze, Silver, Gold, because everyone, well, not everyone, on average, players are low mastery on their champion, so any champion who doesn't require much mastery is going to perform better than his cohort of opponents, right? That said, Trundle is certainly very, very extremely highly performant in top lane, and especially so in low MMRs. That said, what we did ended up being very top lane skewed, ended up being low MMR skewed. Both of those were goals, and he's, again, a very, very strong performer, but if someone's going to be the most performant silver top laner, Trundle is actually probably the correct champion for that to be. He might be a little bit too strong. We're not nerfing him here. We might choose to nerf him in 24B, but he's picking up in pick rate. He's picking up in ban rate. We'll see what happens, but it also could be that a 54% Trundle is actually kind of reasonable, and players are okay with this. By comparison, a 54, A 48% Yone currently has one of the highest ban rates in the game at 48. If Yone went to 54, there would be riots, right? So it's like, obviously not all champions are viewed the same way. I'm using win rate as my measurement here because everyone has access to at least decently accurate win rate data. So I'm just using it because it's like a way that we can kind of shorthand and talk about like power between you and me. But regardless, right, Trundle is X amount of powerful. This manifests through player behavior as 54% win rate, which is not the same thing as a Jax win rate, which is not the same thing as a Yone win rate, or the same thing as a Katarina win rate, right? Trundle's win rate has different considerations around it in the first place. All to say that Trundle having a very high observed win rate, I think, is completely reasonable and expected. And I think if Trundle is ever 50% in low elo, he's a really bad top laner. Considering that Trundle's player base is typically in top lane, this is a pretty good spot for him to be. So we did buff Riven. I mentioned a little bit why we buffed her a little while back, as far as I can recall, in the earlier thing about Reddit feedback and whatnot. But suffice to say that Riven's buffs landed pretty well. Not much to say. Overall, I think pretty good. Janna buffs landed in a pretty good spot as well. I saw there was a post around like Halo Blades roam Janna being a thing. To be fair, she is actually a worse roamer than the 2018-2019 version of Janna, since her passive doesn't affect herself while running across the river. So she actually is literally a worse roamer than that version of Janna. She's, of course, still very fast. She's still Prince-free move speed. Don't get me wrong, she's faster than most other champions, not named Bard. Whatever, it's just true. But so far, I haven't seen anything that's really stood out. Like, her Halo Blades win rate, last I checked, is pretty normal. It's the kind of thing where it's like, oh, I see Halo Blades Brier and it's 56. I'm like, oh, shoot, this build is broken. And I look at Halo Blades Janna and it's like, it's same as Aerie. Okay, we're probably fine. So obviously keep your ears to the ground, right? This patch, again, will be live for a full 1 week, and then 24B comes out. Of course, this patch won't go out for another week, to be clear. That's, how our patch cadence works. But yeah, seemingly Janna is, pretty strong, and that's fine. If she finds herself a cohort of players, great, because this is a champion who has really fallen off in terms of popularity, and if she goes back to being a 52% win rate support, which she was before these updates in point 23 or 22 or whatever, I forget. I guess, yeah, point 22 is the update, right? But yeah, it's like, okay, if she goes back to that win rate but has a larger percentage of a player base, awesome, great, congratulations, good stuff. I mentioned that Vel'Koz did pretty well in the previous patch. Gained about 1% win rate. The changes were mid lane skewed from what I could tell. They seriously spiked his kills per game, which is nice. Champion's performing pretty well power level wise. Again, there's discussion around if Vel'Koz should be weak to melee or as weak to melee as he is right now. I know August has been talking about some changes. We'll talk about this later on when we actually talk about the changes going into Vel'Koz this patch. There's a couple of small bug fixes. But overall, these changes landed really, really well. Increases play rate, increases pick rate, increases win rate. All pretty good things. Draven just had a change where his R returns back to him when he's dead. This did very, very little for his overall power level. His pick rate meaningfully increased, which I find interesting. It leads me to believe we should try to do these changes more often. We had this with Bard way back when, where it was very, very little power, but the changes looked cool, and so his pick rate spiked. This happened with Jinx as well, where she gained like only 1.5% win rate in total, but like she still incredibly spiked her pick rate. So definitely would like us to do more of these kinds of changes where they are really feels based but don't carry a whole lot of power. I think really League of Legends is a very, very well balanced game, and I would rather us do in any given patch like I would rather do 8 changes like Draven R returns while dead than 10 plus or minus 3 AD changes. And that means like the patches are going to look fairly empty in a lot of cases, because a lot of times these investigations take longer. Like it takes way longer for me to figure out the scripting on Draven R than to give him 3 attack damage, right? One of these is an order of magnitude easier, which means the number of changes we can do is just astronomically different, depending on how much we focus on stuff. But worth noting that like these do have a pretty big impact, but it's also, to be fair, have a very meaningful time cost as well. Final change that was a buff in the last build, or the last patch, was turret gold. So this was tier 2 turrets. Got 125 gold shifted from global into local gold, but no change in actual gold income. And then the inhibitor turrets got a 200 total gold increase that all went to local gold, plus 125 went from global into local, so that they are as valuable overall as outer turrets and give a pretty big payout to the champion who kills them. Overall results have been very, very good. So measuring, using our statistical model for role agency, this did what I hoped it would, which was very clearly spike top lane. Via this model, this is the highest top lane agency has been, I don't want to say all year we didn't have this model. So the model did not track every server all year. Like it tracked only Korea as like a proof of concept for a couple of months and then added the rest of the servers. I will say that this is the highest top lane measured top lane agency, and it's not a perfect model to be clear, like but it at least directionally says what we're doing, right? Like even if a model has flaws, and it does have some flaws, like I can't tell you this is like exactly by the decimal point, like exactly how much power at agency at minute 4 Ezreal has. Like that's not the kind of thing we can do and compare Ezreal bot to Maokai jungle. It's not what this is about. But to say that, okay, directionally this is the highest top lane agency has been since we've been tracking all the servers with this and using all the data to build up the model. And so, we've gotten top lane into a much better state with the chain, which is good. We'll see, of course, what happens with 14.1, but this did have a meaningful impact in top lane agency, which is very good, which we're happy about. Jungle agency, right, tracking down from the changes in 0.20 as well. And we've definitely gotten the roles into a better state than they were, 6 months ago, which we're really happy about. Anyway, in terms of individual champion impact, the biggest changes I saw for champs who weren't directly changed were champions like Rumble. I think Rumble lost around 0.5, 0.7% win rate as a top laner who's not good at killing turrets and doesn't get to, use the tier 2 turret snowball or the inhibitor turret kill snowball because he's going to go team fight and not split push. So the poster child for I'm not split pushing and killing turrets went down around, again, 0.5, 0.7% win rate, which means that got diffused across, right, like win rate is zero sum, so somewhere else, some champion gained 0.5 to 0.7 as the better turret killer. I think like Fiora went up, I think specifically, as a champion who's actually known for staying inside lane, going hull breaker, and knocking turrets down. So overall, again, pretty good stuff. This, of course, did buff split pushing, which I'm not surprised about, but overall, pretty positive changes, which I'm happy about. Of course, we had some nerfs the previous patch as well. Brier, this nerf was around 1.5% win rate day 1. As days go on, this champ continues to gain win rate as players gain mastery. So I know we are chain nerfing Brier. To be fair, we never put her below 50% measured win rate for the most part. So like at any given point, we could have gone harder and tried to shove Brier down to 49 or something and then have her climb back up to 51 by the end of the patch. Spoiler, we're nerfing Brier again this patch as well. And yeah, it feels really weird that we're nerfing Brier patch after patch after patch after patch. But like, she keeps going to 51.5 and then going back to 53 by the end of the patch. And it's like, this just keeps happening. Brier, to be fair, has by far the steepest mastery curve we have ever seen for any champion in the history of League of Legends. This trumps Rek'Sai and Azir and Yasuo and all these champs. Like, Brier is by far standout unique here. So most champions stopped gaining win rate this quickly. Nefiri stopped gaining win rate after around 3 patches. We're like 8 patches in or something on Brier, and it keeps going by over 1% per patch, which is, again, like new territory. This is wild, but true. Either way, we nerf Brier, she gains some win rate. She's got to, we got to go again. Azir, I think the changes were really, really good. Really cool stuff to say, okay, your on-hit effects now matter. What's nice is we now have a very easy lever to use if we say, hey, you know what? We actually want to have the observed win rate of Nashor's second and Shadow Flame second to be tied. And when mage items come out in 14.1 and we compare Nashor's Tooth to whatever else he's going to build, and we're like, actually, Azir is no longer good at Nashor's anymore. We can just like tweak the on-hit mod as the specific lever that says Nashor's is good here, and we have a bespoke lever that is the Nashor's Tooth lever. It's also the Lichbane lever, which scares me a little bit. Right now hasn't seemed to be dominant, but is something in the back of my mind for sure. I think there's a really good chance that like Lichbane Azir is unhealthy, but we'll see. No guarantees, but if it starts getting played en masse and we start, seeing what it actually plays like, maybe it has to be a pivot, but for now, it's fine. Anyway, this ended up being a bit win rate negative, though. The amount of damage taken off of W was a bit too big. That said, now that Nashor's Tooth is the dominant build, if we're not walking that back, which we're not right now, I think for now, like, let Azir players build Nashor's. Like, Azir players have chosen to build Nashor's even when it wasn't better than Shadow Flame. Now that it is, I think for now we can let him just have this be the optimal build. Let him build it second every game. And just be like, yes, this is your champion. You're like Kale. You build Nashor's. This is your champion. Congratulations. You like this item. I don't think that's wrong, to be clear. I think it's actually okay to be hardbound to building Nashor's second. But what this means, though, is I want to measure the win rate of Luden's Shadow Flame, Crown Shadow Flame, Luden's Nashor's, Crown Nashor's, and Leandry's Nashor's, and target those win rates Those win rates are down about 0.3%, and so we're giving Azir some compensation buffs because we don't want to make him a worse champion than he was, but these buffs are aimed pretty low. Jarvan got nerfed a bit below 50. It's fine. When it's relatively on magnitude. Ziggs got nerfed a reasonably decent amount. He's still a quite good bot laner. He is a 50% mid laner. 50% in mid isn't great, but he's also one of the only mages where actually his primary player base is bot lane. Like for Karthus, his primary player base is still in jungle. For Seraphine, her primary player base is still in support. For Swain, his primary player base is still in support, despite being a truly excellent mid and bot laner. Brand is a totally solid bot laner. His player base is in support and a decent amount in jungle. Zyra is actually a good bot laner. Her player base is in support with a decent amount in jungle. Veigar is pretty good in bot lane. His player base is mostly in mid. Ziggs is the only mage where people are like, actually, yeah, he's a bot laner. And like, I'm okay with supporting that long term. I'm okay with that being the total thing that's happening. But like, I think it's the only mage where it's actually his primary player base. So I'm happy to embrace that. Again, I wouldn't mind closing the gaps there. Usually what we've been trying to do are levers that we thought would nerf bot more than mid. I think that's been true to very, very light degrees. The gap has closed a little bit. I remember seeing a comment was like, wait, why did you guys buff the Q radius if you're just going to do these other nerfs? It's like, well, the buff the Q radius was meant to be a gap close on mid versus bot, and it was. It was just so much power on bot, we had to walk back some power. And 4 armor was basically no power, so we had to do an actual nerf. And now the gap is closed on Ziggs mid versus bot, which is good. He's more reliable, which is probably good, and we move on. Next change was to Naafiri. We nerfed Naafiri. Unfortunately, this change was over magnitude. That said, buffing her back up is not extremely urgent. She's a bit above 50% in low elo. That's still probably a bit low for a meant to be fairly easy to play, fairly low mastery, and fairly low agency assassin. I think Naafiri really can sit, 51, 52 in low elo and be a very healthy champion. I think that is reasonable. Much like Brand is easy to play, and Brand is a 52% mid laner in low elo, and that's just like, yes, this is what we expect from this champion, right? Not doing anything compensation in the incredible short term. She might go in the micro patch in 0.24b. We could choose to do that. I'm not sure. But regardless, not much to say other than we did go over magnitude, which is my fault. I did the changes. It's always a team effort, right? We always get sign off from many other people. We get analysis done, and we got it wrong. It is what it is. I expect that Naafiri will be in a very good spot with the assassin item changes in 14.1. I expect this to be incredibly win rate positive to assassins. I personally believe that assassins and mages are going to be the 2 biggest winners of that patch from what I've seen so far. We'll see long term, but I think Naafiri just gains a bunch from that, and so I think it's okay if Naafiri is like only 50.5 in low elo for a month, and then just becomes fully powerful when the assassin item comes out. So that's kind of the thought here. We still might choose a micro patch. We'll see. Finally, we had a nerf to Cassante. This nerf was very big. It was over magnitude. However, directionally, we're very happy with the things that we nerfed, which was level 6 all-in power spike, and just overall safety to spam Q and play a losing matchup from 500 range away with a almost unmissable poke plus slow to say, okay, well, it's going to be more expensive. You can't just play it out this way. And now that he's actually in a little bit of a weak spot, we're trying to give him power back onto his W. The buffs this patch are meant to be a little bit low magnitude. I'm trying not to overshoot. We've unfortunately overshot him each time, which is really unfortunate. So we're aiming a little bit low in the patch coming out. But yeah, trying to put more of kind of the power budget into his W now that we took it away from his Q, which was good and we're happy about. Okay, so long-term projects, not a lot. I'm just leaving it here because then I'll have to rewrite it next time. But yeah, nothing new. I mentioned what we were working on long-term for 13.23. Still working on that kind of stuff. Again, it's most of that ships in 14.1, so we'll see. As with any of this kind of stuff, sometimes the end result is nothing. We actually put an article out recently, which was about the explorations for the map changes for 2024, and it was like version 1 was bad, and version 2 was bad, and version 3 had something we liked, and then we eventually found a version that was good. And sometimes it's like, okay, we tried something out. We're like, hey, here's a systems update to, I don't know, gold income. I'm making it up. We're not doing a systems update to gold income, and we're gonna try this out. I'm gonna try this formula and that formula. It's like, actually, none of these were good. Okay, I tried. It cost me a couple of weeks of time off and on. Wasn't a good project. All right, well, I learned something. Moving on. And so sometimes the end result of these long-term projects are there is no change because we explored and decided actually it's not going to work, and that's fine, right? That's expected. You're expected to throw out some of your work because you explore and decide that there's nothing here. or you're like, actually, I think there is something here, but it's really, really high scope, and there's other priorities that are more important than this high scope version of this like medium like usefulness project. And it's like in the backlog, and maybe we'll do it if we have nothing else to do. Anyway, this is just to say that there's nothing new, but that, you know, you might see actually very few long-term projects come out of LivePod, for example. Anyway, let's talk about what's going into the patch, though, which is actually happening. Here we go. Finally, we are 30 minutes in talking about the contents of the patch itself, which is we are nerfing Ivern. It's one of the two direct nerfs this patch. Ivern is definitely an extremely strong performer. Big winner. He's been winning a lot of games. Basically, he got a lot of win rate when the jungle update happened that slowed down a lot of champion jungle clears. Of course, Ivern is unaffected by that, so he was doing very, very well. So the two nerf targets went for, first off, was base HP. I have been doing quite a lot of base HP nerfs. I've also been, to be fair, doing a fair decent number of health growth buffs. But this basically is saying, hey, looking at Ivern and comparing him to other champions that he is similar to, he still had a lot of his melee champion base stats, despite being converted to a full-time ranged champion fairly recently. His MR growth, for example, was something that I nerfed back in 13-12 or something around there. And he still has really high base health. He has a really high base health for an enchanter. Like if you're going to play him in bot lane as a core enchanter, he's like okay there. His health is much higher than pretty much every other enchanter, which just I don't think is reasonable. And so in terms of like, hey, this champion is doing too well, what's an outlier he doesn't need? It's like, yeah, it's a simple change. It's the same kind of thing as -3 AD, but it's the kind of change that's -3 AD, but also directionally correct for the champion, which is like, this champion is winning too many games, and I don't care that much around like where his power level lies, but I don't like outliers when they aren't needed. To me, Ivern's not the kind of champion who needs to be baseline extra healthy, and so he's not going to be baseline extra healthy. We're cutting about 25 base health off of him, and then basically we're targeting an amount of win rate magnitude. So it's like, hey, what basically asking for feedback from internally, like what kind of feels the most overboard on Ivern. I went for the E-slow. Logic here is that Q is a skill shot crowd control, R requires 3 hits for the crowd control, E is a little bit trivial. It also kind of just guarantees your Q and your R anyway, but to say, okay, let's make him a little bit more reliant on his skill shots, I think is reasonable to do. You don't have the kind of the guaranteed, like press the E on a frontliner and, you know, get a guaranteed fast slow. So it's a minor nerf for the slow. It's not going to be a ton of win rate down, but it's just a small nerf to Ivern. Next, there is a pretty big set of changes to Brier. So Brier, once again, the goal continues to be closing the gap some on lethality performance versus fighter performance. There's a couple of things here. So one is an attack speed reshape. By increasing your AS ratio but lowering your sources of bonus AS elsewhere, you increase the value of sources of additive attack speed. Certainly this technically does a little bit with Halo Blades, but the primary benefit is this actually increases the value of an item like Stridebreaker and an item like Blade of the Ruin King. It lightly increases the value of those items, which, hey, those are fighter items, right? There aren't lethality attack speed items. There are some fighter attack speed items. And so moving her a little bit in this world where she cares and has an appetite for bonus AS, then this and to be clear, this is a very light nudge. This will do pretty little on its own, but it's still directionally the right kind of change, and so is a good change. Some just straight up flat nerfs that are just nerfs, because keep in mind, like, this is roughly power neutral, to be honest. So -2 armor and -0-20 damage on Q is some damage down, some durability down. It's a little bit less. The less baseline durability you have, the more likely you are to build something like a Death's Dance or something. So, you know, the fewer free durability stats you get, the more you want to buy durability stats. So it's just a very, very light touch in that direction, not doing a ton. Flat damage on Q, we know, is not a very hard lever, but also, I mean, this damage just can be low. It doesn't need to be high. It doesn't really matter. So we can just kind of take it down some, and she's not going to, you know, be sad about it really, but it still is a nerf, and it's kind of thing where it's like, okay, well, more of your damage is about auto attacking, which means we can care more about Bork and Stridebreaker and longer combat patterns. Also worth noting that, you know, the W attack speed has been nerfed, but her base, like her attack speed growth hasn't. So her damage out of her W is strictly better, and her damage in her W is relatively power neutral, which means that if you are less reliant on damage during W and the W times out and you keep fighting, that is also a bit more of a fighter pattern. Again, very, very light touch, but it's technically true. Same thing with, you know, bursting during the Q and whatnot, right? Okay, so next up is a small nerf to the damage reduction of E. This is again going after her relatively easy durability tools that she gets without investing. We could do things like making the EDR scale off of bonus health or something and say, no, you really want to run Overgrowth and get a Gore Drinker and whatever, and this is the way to get, meaningful DR. That one's a little bit scary as a choice, but if the damage reduction is lower, you have a greater chance of being bursted out as a lethality build than as a tankier build who doesn't rely on this mechanic as much. So I think there's a reasonable argument that this lever is very, very lightly skewed toward fighter builds, even though it is, of course, a direct nerf. And again, the goal is to directly nerf this champion. And then the final change is an R damage. I'm going to call it a quote nerf. It actually depends on what you build. So what I experienced from the Aatrox changes back in 0.17 around there, when I converted his passive and his W to magic damage, was the math I did suggested that, and this ended up being proven out in win rate data as well, that converting any given spell from physical to magic damage is power neutral on a lethality build and power positive on a non-lethality build. So converting to magic in and of itself would just be a buff to Stridebreaker and then no change to Yomu's or Duskblade and Collector. But there is a small, I guess decent AD ratio nerf on the R that maths out to being about 10% less R spell damage. So Lethality Brier will do about 10% less R spell damage, and Fighter Brier will deal 2 to 10% more R spell damage is roughly the math. It's in that ballpark. And so this is to be clear, R is literally being buffed for Fighter Brier. These are all direct nerfs to every build, and then this is relatively power neutral, a light buff to Fighter Brier. But a lot of Brier's win rate growth has been people moving over to lethality build. So even if all we do is bring the lethality build down to the fighter's power level, that's a very big win. Now we can just start doing generic nerfs that we don't have to keep what's the lever we can use that moves over here. There's other things we can do. We can convert the Q to magic damage as well. We can do all kinds of stuff to try to move her around. We can make Black Cleaver better by making the bleed tick faster, because then it would, you'd get 2 stacks per second instead of 1 stack per second. All kinds of stuff that could be done. Is all to say that there are some Briar nerfs. Here's logic behind them. Then there are a whole bunch of buffs aimed primarily at setting these champions up for success long term, to where we expect there to be really significant balance thrash in 14.1. The goal of these changes is not temporal balance. It's the goal is not bringing a 49 champ up to 50 because now they're at 50 and we've done it. It's we expect there to be a 57% win rate champ in 14.1 and a 44% win rate champ in 14.1. And the goal here with any of these changes is that this is for sure not the lever we're going to touch again, because we think this is correct for the champion long term, because it solves some kind of core systemic issue with the champion overall. In most cases, some of these are actually pure reactive balance, but most are not. So Azir is getting one of the 3 W nerfs taken back from the previous patch because we made Nashor's Tooth work on him, and Nashor's Tooth, of course, is a core item. This was going to be strict power positive, and so, of course, we could have, because we didn't have pro play on this patch, we could have said, we're going to ship the buff, enjoy, it's just there, we'll nerf him afterwards, we know we're going to, but, we preemptively nerfed him. The preemptive nerfs were a little bit too hard. I guess I was right. I think I said in patch rundown that it was going to be a nerf, and it was right. So yay, +1 point to me, I guess. I had a good read. But regardless, it's just walking back to the early damage. And basically what it comes down to is what I observed is that Azir is best served building Nashor's Tooth second. So I'm not expecting Azir to finish the item until level 13 or so, which means the nerfs that affected him 1 through 10 are the ones I wanted to walk back. And so I specifically went for his flat damage on W, because he gets that at level, 3, 4, 3, 5, 7, 9, or 4, 4, 5, 7, 9, whatever, which is that's where he obviously can't build Nashor's Tooth. And then, we're going to start there. The goal is actually relatively low win rate gain, because a lot of the win rate loss that we observed with Azir was that Luden's Shadow Flame is no longer a good build, but if you just did Luden's Nashor's, you're fine for the most part. So it's actually a very light touch, because there's just now a clear optimal build that players should just be building. And so we're just trying to pivot around that and make that sort of that's the build. For now, it's the build. And, we'll update things if needed to if the builds get weird again in 14.1, but it's a light touch on purpose. For Braum, we're doing 2 levers here. One is his baseline level 1 mana regen. this, I think, is just a number that is low. My experience playing occasional Braum games is it is pretty easy to run out of mana when you are trying to play into a ranged matchup. Like Braum Karma, Braum Janna, Braum anything ranged just feels impossible. You can occasionally, do your cool Flash Exhaust or Flash Q or whatever and find the engage, but like generally speaking, it's like it would be nice if you could fight back occasionally. And Q isn't super expensive, but it's the kind of thing where just letting him cast a few more spells lets him be more active and just kind of feel better about it. And so it's just like it's a light mana regen buff. Just so that you're like a little bit more often able to fight back. It very lightly softens his range matchups. He's still going to be bad in range matchups. That's still going to be true. It's fine. It's just saying, hey, you get to play a little bit more League of Legends, like in these contexts, right? And that's all. The other buff is actually softening somewhat of a nerf that got shipped a while back in 2020, around there, maybe earlier. I don't remember exactly. But there was a big set of changes to Braum to kick him out of pro play, and they're successful. Braum is still in pro play some, so we can't go too hard here. In fact, like this might be too much. We actually might have to walk this one back. This is somewhat more testing the waters, where like walking it back partially, I should say, which is so the change way back when was to say, so the old version of Braum R said if you are in the circle around him, you will get a large CC. If no one's hit, the first target to hit gets the large CC, and then everyone else who is on the line and not at the circle gets the small CC. That logic got changed to interpolate from some small number to max CC, where it's small number in melee range and then max CC at max range, and the first target hit gets that interpolated number, and then everyone else gets small number, which meant flash melee range R was always garbage. It was always 0.3 seconds instead of like 1 or 1.5. And it also meant that like even a mid-range, like I kind of catch you R, is just like worse than it was. And basically the fact that pro play is so slow, I've said this many times, but I will keep reiterating because I think it's very, very true and it's something you can, I think, really easily track across pro play is long cooldown, high impact ultis are really pro skewed. The logic here is that pro play is very slow paced and very team fight focused. And so if your engage is, well, yeah, with Flash, I have an instant 1.5 second team-wide hard CC, that's just better Nautilus R. And that's what Braum had for a long time, was if I get in range of all of you, I'm just going to hit like 3 of you with a 1.25 second long hard stun. That's just better than, like, that's just Rel with fewer steps. And then I have my passive and my Q to like follow up and do even more, and so we can spread even more stuns. And now it's actually a 2.5 second CC chain. It's like, yeah, clearly Braum was a pro menace when he beat all the tanks and was the best tank engage anyway. So of course he's the best. This doesn't change that by a ton. This makes his follow-up CC still much, much worse than Nautilus or Leona or whatever. The AoE power of it, right? It's worse than Rakan, it's worse than Rel, it's worse than a lot of the champions. But it's better. And, it's a high impact, very fun moment. That's a cool thing. Let's give that to Braum, right? Let him feel good about that. So a lot of kind of those changes. And it's kind of thing where it's like, look, this might be a little bit too much. We can walk back partially. But I say behind the mana gen change is like the kind of thing where it's like, yeah, Braum could be more active. And also, arguably, Braum is the kind of champion that maybe should have a high resting win rate. I think he makes the game better when he's played. We're doing buffs to Galio. We made a bunch of changes to Galio early in the year that were... we tried really hard not to just hard increase damage and say, no, it's really valuable that Galio has a strong strategic niche. He is a global mid laner. He's got the map mobility. He's good at supporting his team. He is good at absorbing magic damage in team fights. He's going to have this big shield that like reliably says he's going to be able to step up and like play these fights out, right? And be a frontline. And we did that. We pushed and made sure that Galio was really good at those things. And I think those were correct to do, to be clear. I think it's important that if your champion has an obvious strategic niche, you should try to push them pretty hard in that strategic niche and make sure they're actually good at that. Like that's really valuable. If Galio's actually like not worth taking for the global, it means his global is too bad. Why does he have a global? Like, yeah, the cooldown might be an important lever and something, but like it needs to still be a good spell and whatnot. And his mana damage shield should be like at least as good as Malphite. And it's like it's closer now than it was then. Because again, this is like a core part of his kit. It should be, almost as good as comparable spells, right? Regardless, I actually had, as a random side project, started diving into Galio's patch history and his like historic breadth and depth for players. And what I uncovered, I guess, or saw or identified was that players seem to enjoy Galio the most when he had lower cooldowns. It's actually worth noting that Q cooldown is actually one of the very initial suggested levers by the designer who did all the other Galio changes this year. And it was me and my boss pushing like, well, we should play up his strategic niche first, and then we can do like other sort of more generic stuff later. And so we did. And it's like, okay, well, we can bump Galio up. He's, very unpopular for historic norms, so something is clearly fallen by the wayside. Cooldowns do tend to be very enjoyable as outputs. I also do think that like melee champions, even tanks, like they actually need some kind of low cooldown repeatable ability to feel like they're just more than a burst mage. What's nice is having low cooldown spell damage means you're better at using demonic. That's actually kind of a nice thing. I think demonic right now is his first or second most popular second item on Galio, and if you're applying spells more often because your Q cooldown is down, you're better at applying demonic, and it's like, great, you are now playing more of an AP bruiser build. One of the other levers I suggested that he just went with his Q instead, which is totally fine, was like, what if we made E a flat 7-second cooldown, so like you can cast E twice per fight. You're like, EQWing, and then the first spell back is gonna be your E again, then you wait, and then Q's back, then E's back again, and you have some kind of different combat flow. I think it is important, by the way, as a different sort of topic here, that your champion's cooldowns should, in general, not sync up too easily. I think you actually want the innate like combat variance of, obviously when the fight starts, all my spells are up, but they might not all be worth casting right away. Like, you don't press win while start every team fight if you're Yasuo. Like, that would be silly. Yone W has context around how many champions can hit with it. Nautilus E needs to be in range to press E. Now, to be fair, when Nautilus engages, he Qs someone, then presses R, and then just presses all his buttons at the same time. And then, like, okay, he probably then tries to auto-attack unique champs for his passive, and he has something to do, like that takes up some mind share and actually has some optimizations when he's running around doing this. His W dot kind of has this as well. If they're not lasted long enough to like refresh it on different targets, that would kind of be there. That's not really true. It's like only 2 seconds long. But like, at least he has something to do. Leona has a 5-second cooldown on her Q, which means she has something repeatable to do, pretty quickly into a team fight. Rakan has 2 casts of his E and has context around when you press Q. So even after going for his like typical RW engage, it's like, okay, and I might Q right away, but I'm gonna shield once, and then I might wait, and then 4 seconds later I'm gonna shield again, and then now I'm pretty close to my W coming back up, and it's like, you want that kind of flow where you have something to do, and something to do every few seconds. That's kind of how you get a pretty good team fight. For Galio, it's like, well, you press all your buttons. I guess your passive has a 4-second cooldown, but you're waiting 10 for your Q, and you're waiting, I think it's like 11 at rank 1 for your E, and you max E last. So it's like, yeah, he's got a really, really long window where there's nothing to do midway through a team fight. So this does mean that he needs a short cooldown. That's the Q. I think this is a good change, and that's sort of my thought process behind, fight cadence, and hopefully this makes sense, and hopefully you agree. So K'Sante, as mentioned, he was nerfed in the previous patch. We're happy with what the nerfs did, but they're over magnitude, so we're trying to add power back in ways that say K'Sante still has some bad matchups, but in his good matchups he can be better, and give him power in sources that are, if we can, low elo skewed, and are especially just fair. So K'Sante's W is probably his fairest spell. Now that we've made E weaker and Q weaker, we can give more power into the W and say this is a more core part of how you're going to fight. And lock Moira's power behind that. So if you're playing into someone like Fiora, who is going to riposte you out of it, or Riven, who will just dodge your W no matter what. Or though I don't think Riven actually wins the matchup because I think she doesn't have good enough anti-physical, but I'm not sure. I haven't looked at that matchup in a while. But like Camille, who has obviously like substantial true damage and thus doesn't care about your damage reduction. It's like, oh, cool. These are all champions who can have favorable interactions with K'Sante, and so he can. He can't just like wash bad matchups because his core tool is W, and W has really sharp counterplay based on kit. Awesome, right? Gwen has true damage as well through her Q, right? All to say that putting more power into K'Sante W is, I think, a really good idea for making sure that he has good and bad matchups and can't be a safely blinded top laner. This allows us to do a lot in terms of preserving, getting him away from being pro-jailed, right? So significant mana reduction on his W, since we made Q more expensive. Let's let you cast W and feel good about it. And then the gold scaling on his W is going up. Of course, a very normal K'Sante combo is to use W at a baseline and then, use that to press Q auto R, or just like auto Q R, or just, auto R or whatever. And then now that you've landed R, it's again Q auto W, and you're going to land two Ws together, basically. So we know that that's going to happen. If you land W1, you can R, then you can land W2. That's definitely out of power. It's definitely really valuable. It could be that the W shouldn't reset when you go all out. It's been there for the entire time, but it could be that, like, it's reset to a 5-second cooldown if it was longer than that. And it's probably still correct to, like, combo W into R into eventual W, but you can't put them all together right away. There's totally maybe something there where we want to, like, really hamper his burst. I could totally see that. Regardless, the reason we're doing W damage is it's still his most fair damage spell that sort of requires some level of commitment and has really sharp counterplay. His passive could as well, to be fair, but W is also really strong in this regard. Anyway, the secondary point here is we're trying to reintroduce more gold scaling onto the kit, because if he has bad matchups and a lot of his damage overall is locked behind earning the gold to then deal the damage, then a bad matchup can say, actually, you don't have the damage anymore, right? Like, he's just hard lost 20 damage off his Q forever at this point, right? By the time this really kicks in, and like that's just gone forever. And that's the Q on your base combo. That's the Q, the 4 Qs you're casting while you're all out. Like, that's 80 damage gone. It's like, well, you're gonna eventually get that back somewhere, and then you're gonna get this back on the spell that's dodgeable, that has counterplay, that people can bring their own parries for. Aurelia W, Fiora W, Gwen. I guess to be fair, Gwen wouldn't really stop that because you're melee range, but maybe you can dodge it with E or whatever, right? It was like, this is kind of the point here to say, no, like, let's put the power into places that have the counterplay. And so kind of the point of doing this here. And again, saying that it's in your gold scaling so that if you have a bad lane, you might not recover, because that's typical of a lot of, vaguely damage-oriented top laners. So 2 buffs to Leona, a split between more damage and more durability. I personally am a fan of not trying to undo durability increases. So if we're doing buffs, I would like to try to be close in terms of when are we doing damage, when we're doing durability, when we're doing other stuff. And again, this of course is a power creep patch, so we're just going to power creep, and it's obviously a fair bit of damage here in this patch. But in the case of Leona, it's a mix between durability and damage output, which I'm happy about. But it basically just means, like, yep, Leona will have some damage output here. Not much to say, right? It's more resist at ranks 2 through 5 of W. It's 50 flat damage on R. To be fair, R's base damage is 100, which seems very low for an ulti, so just kind of bring it up to a decent baseline. Not much else to say here. This is just, like, I think a good change to Leona. Lucian is getting a pretty small buff here. This actually has the potential of being a very, very delicate lever. This is 3 seconds off rank 1E, and then no change on rank 5, so it peters out. But the point here is Lucian, after getting unbound from Nami successfully. Now, players on average still play Lucian Nami together a lot. This is not his best combo. It's really not. Y'all can learn to play other lanes. Please stop trying to force Lucian Nami. It's not really a thing anymore. It's fine, but it's not special. But now that they're unbound and out of pro jail, so good work by the designers who unbound these champions, Lucian, and to be fair, also Nami, and Nami might come later, can be buffed to be much stronger champions now that they're no longer bound. And we're trying to say that, look, we know that Lucian right now is already kind of elite skewed. He's one of the harder to play AD carries. And we also know that he's an early game skewed champion, which will also tend to elite skew him. We're okay with both those things being true. Lucian will probably never have a 50% win rate in silver. Some of this is because he's just harder to play than other marksmen, so the average silver bot laner is not experienced enough on Lucian to, like, come through with a good enough win rate. That's just going to be true about this champion. Some of this might be that also your team is not good at playing through your leads, and you're getting let down by your team not being able to snowball you being ahead. There's probably some degree of that as well. We know early game champs are elite skewed. But also, we think it's more important that strategic niches are upheld, and so we've kicked Lucian out of mid lane. Good. We've decoupled the Lucian Nami hard binding that put them in pro jail. Good. Lucian is going to be bound to the fact that he is one of the harder to play marksmen. He's an early game bully, and we're embracing that, and that is his strategic niche. And this means he will not have a very, very good silver win rate. Okay. That's fine. That's the point of this champion. That's what he's about. He's going to be more of a lane bully. That's the champion's niche. Go for it. And it's kind of champion that, again, can have like a 46-47% win rate in silver and still be very, very popular and very, very fun. And that's fine. Like, win rate is not actual power level. It's just, here's how we observe the performance of players. The average silver Lucian doesn't win as many games as though they played Misfortune. That doesn't mean Lucian is a worse champ than Misfortune. It just means Misfortune's easier to play and good in late game team fights, which is very common in silver. Okay, these are just true statements. That's fine. The environment makes them good. Okay. So Mordekaiser, I did see the preemptive lament. Oh my gosh, Riot, they're going to buff the Q. Yes, Riot is going to buff the Q. So two thoughts here. One, there's totally room for a larger shape change, which takes some power away from Mordekaiser's level scaling and puts it into gold scaling to basically lower the effect of he's got a Rylaze, he landed his spells, I guess he just kills me. Because XP gain does not really fluctuate, just like in League of Legends. Obviously, it fluctuates based on role, but the variance in XP gain in most roles is very, very low. So Mordekaiser like always gets his levels, and especially in low elo games go longer. And so he always gets his levels, and his passive damage and his Q damage pretty aggressively scale just with champ level and nothing else. Which means that he just inevitably has enough damage always. And if instead Mordekaiser has to build a bit more damagey and is burstable, maybe, or close to burstable, or 2v1able or something, and you play around his ulti somehow, or his damage is locked behind gold income. Gold income has a much more fluctuation than XP income. And it's like, actually, Mordekaiser's having a bad game. He doesn't have enough damage this time. Then suddenly it's like, oh, wow, we have injected variance into Mordekaiser's combat pattern. And the thing is, if Mordekaiser's... So one of the comments I saw was like, the Mordekaiser's E kind of sucks. And sure, Mordekaiser's E kind of sucks, but it's also like the only ability with variance in Mordekaiser's entire kit. You can't miss W. Q is dodgeable with flash and some dashes, sure. I can Sivir spell shoot it on reflex, yeah, but like if I'm Misfortune... probably not dodging Q in a lot of cases. And it's like, okay, well, it's dodge the E, or he ghosts at you, autos you 3 times, now his passive's on, now you're slowed, now you're definitely not dodging Q without a dash. And it's like, where's the combat variance here? And by the way, you can't run away, he ulted you, right? And so this entire thing, this is not to say like Mordekaiser is a cursed design. I don't think he's far off from being in a really, really good spot. But in the current version of Mordekaiser, there isn't a lot of variance on this champion. He kind of always reaches you. I guess if you have Vayne Condemn and you have Tumble, I think Vayne beats him like in lane and in Death Realm because he doesn't steal... I don't even know if he steals attack speed, but it's not enough to not make Silverbolts crush him. And she just has all the tools to beat everything he does because she just keeps him out of auto attack range. Anyway, I don't think there are maybe like enough matchups where Mordekaiser is really favored or really unfavored. All to say that I think Mordekaiser is a very low variance champion. Okay. Let's go and say Mordekaiser is a low variance champion. By making Mordekaiser care more about gold scaling, we can increase his game-to-game variance because there's going to be games where he's ahead and actually turbo stomps you and games where he's behind and can't win the duels as easily. That's valuable. Also, I know that players want to build AP on Mordekaiser, so giving him better AP ratio says that, it might be worth going for that Demonic or that Rift Maker instead of Jack Show or that 4th item Zonia's or Banshee's Veil instead of into Stone Plate or whatever else you're going to build. And moving in that direction is helpful. I think is good. It's something that is good for Mordekaiser to make sure that he can keep building AP Bruiser style items. I think that is very good for him. It's very healthy for him. So yes, it's a lot of talk around, hey, whatever, but this kind of thing where it's like, hey, we're doing very small scope changes to Mordekaiser. If we want to do bigger scope changes, we could do all kinds of stuff around where the level scaling goes and where his Q damage goes, and maybe he even wants to build a Titanic Hydra, and we add some AD ratios back, and it's like, nah, you have an auto attack build or something, and some way of saying that there's more combat variance to Mordekaiser, I think could be totally reasonable here. Regardless, Q is his weakest ratio. At least in some cases, the spell is dodgeable. And if the power is in gold scaling, it's not in inevitable level scaling, which helps a little bit by increasing the amount of variance in Mordekaiser games. The other change is copying the functionality from Garen R, which is when he starts casting R on you, he reveals you over your head for 1 second, only reveals you. It's a 1 unit radius bubble, it only reveals the core target, so that if you walk in the brush with Mordekaiser R on you, the spell will not cancel. I think where I stand right now, and I could be convinced of otherwise, is for regular targeted spells, if they walk in a brush, they should probably cancel. For ultimates, they should probably not. I think on average, letting your ult always go through brush, it's an ultimate, it gets special treatment. I think that is fine. We did this, like, I think 10 years ago with Ashe Arrow and Ez ult and Jinx Rocket, which is we spawned a vision bubble around your ulti so you can watch it fly across the map and see if you got a near hit. Way more fun than it is powerful. Technically, that Jinx ult flies through Baron, and you know if they're doing Baron or not. Like, you know, in 2011 or 12 or whatever, I don't know when Jinx actually came out, you know, when she first came out, or Ezreal the same, even Ezreal, it's like, you know, Ezreal ult only hits Baron. You get 1 stack of Rising Spell Force, and you have no idea if they're on Baron or not, if they all happen to sidestep it. Now you definitely know they're doing Baron or not. That is powerful. And it means that, like, these global marksmen have a way of checking Baron, you know, kind of fraudulently, but it's way more fun to know that you got a near hit, or that you hit someone and they went down to 2% or whatever. You know, it's supposed to hit and I don't know what happened. So, you know, ultis get to be privileged. Their ultimates, I think they really get to have special rules. They get to be a little bit unfair. I think that's fine. We can gate them around how hard they scale on gold, or how hard they, how hard they, scale on gold, cooldowns and whatnot, right? To say that they're not up all the time. There's all kinds of levers available, but I think ultis are allowed to be privileged very aggressively, and this is one of those cases. We are doing some buffs to Kiana. Version 1 of these changes is actually a bunch of mana cost reductions. The goal was to say, hey, Kiana, you don't have to buy Mana Mune anymore. Go ahead and buy Lethality. Go build your Prowler's Claw second, or really your Axiomark is the real item. Oh, by the way, Kiana players, please build Yomos and not Duskblade. Yomos is better. I would rather have gone, so anyway, this is version 2 though, which is she has more mana instead. Which I actually think is the better version, which is if you don't want to build Mana Mune, congratulations, you have more level 1 mana and more mana growth to say that you probably don't need the tier anymore. Mathematically, this is around 230 mana at level 18, so like, it's not as much as tier would give you, but it's a meaningful amount of extra mana to say that maybe you don't need tier anymore. You're not going to on your like first 2 rotations in lane. It's okay. But by also increasing her baseline mana pool, and by baseline I mean level 1 through level 18, her just overall mana pool, it actually also buffs Mana Mune. Now, of course, it doesn't make the item more necessary from a mana perspective, but because Mana Mune cares about your total mana, your total max mana, not your bonus mana, it means that this is actually just a bonus AD increase to Mana Mune builds. So if you don't build Mana Mune, you have more mana, congratulations, you're not going to run out of mana quickly. If you do have Mana Mune, I mean, that's still also true, but less relevant, but you have more bonus AD. By comparing to Hecarim, I actually thought it was incorrect for Hecarim's best build, or best builds, to be 0 bonus health. I think he should be a fighter more than an assassin. He should have a longer combat pattern. Kiana is mostly an assassin, right? She's building lethality items and items with AD and haste and no bonus health. That is totally fine. Mana Mune is the kind of item that makes sense on Kiana. And so I like took inspiration from like, what do Jace's stats look like? What do Ezreal's stats look like? These are champions we were very happy to have them build Mana Mune on. So you know what? Why don't we copy that? Let's give you really, you know, a solid mana pool to make sure Mana Mune has a solid, you know, basis for your champion. That seems fine. Let's do that. So Kiana, whether you build Mana Mune or not, is getting buffed. Talon, very, very small QL thing. If you are in melee range, Talon's Q resets auto attack. If you do the ranged spell, it doesn't. This is just making sure the ranged spell actually resets your auto attack as well. Very, very little amount of, very, very small amount of power, but honestly, if you're resetting one version of Q, you should reset on both versions of Q, so just a good change. And then finally, well, I guess in terms of sort of strict buffs, Zeri is getting some small buffs this patch. She certainly has been in Pro Jail. I think she was the number 7. I think she was the number 7 AD carry at Worlds this year. She was basically the like second place default teamfight ADC behind Aphelios. I don't consider Kai'Sa a default teamfight ADC personally. The ulti is too much of a help with dives and other stuff to be conventional teamfight AD carry to me. The fact that some people go for a W poke build means she's not a conventional team fighter. Whereas like the things that Zeri and Aphelios do are very much like, I'm a team fighter, and she was the number 2 team fighter. Maybe you disagree. Maybe you think that Xayah is actually that. Okay, then she's the number 3 team fighter. Whatever. Either way, she was still like pretty highly prized for a champ with a 45% win rate in solo queue, which is obviously very, very low. Now, to be fair, Zeri has one of the most aggressive mastery curves of any AD carry in the game. She's harder to play. We should expect that to a certain degree, but she's still really aggressively pro-jailed. So the unfortunate thing is a lot of her numbers were in really, really weird states because we kept trying to fix the Trinity Force Titanic build. So right now, for example, Zeri has very, very bad armor growth, but the highest health growth in the game of any marksman. It's higher than Samira by 2, and it's higher than Draven, it's higher than Lucian, so I'm pretty sure it's number 1. I didn't check literally every AD carry, though. Maybe someone has higher, but it's still like, top 10%, right? Because Titanic Hydra is a bonus health scaler, so having more base health doesn't do anything, and the less armor you have, the less valuable bonus health is, because there's nothing to multiply it against. But eventually we just said, you're just not going to apply Sheen with Q. And by doing that, it's like, oh, well, now you don't have the Trinity Force to go synergize with Titanic Hydra. So you're going to go Titanic Hydra into... Well, you can't go Shield Bow. We got rid of the Mythic passive a while back. That got deleted in 13.10. So Shield Bow Titanic is gone. I killed that one. So I was like, wait, actually, we might have solved Titanic through these other systems where you no longer get health from Shield Bow. You no longer build Trinity Force. Oh, you don't need to have these weird base stats anymore. And we could probably... eventually like shift her from the weird bonus health to like normal marksman armor and normal marksman health, and then she can at least like look normal to other champions, which I think is like valuable. But also like her attack damage growth is so low because of Trinity Force, right? It's like you have like 50 base AD and like 1.3 AD growth because like, wow, your Sheen synergy is just too good. We can't get you off this Trinity Force, and now she just like can't use Sheen anymore. This doesn't work on her Q, and it's like, oh, you can once again have normal champion base stats. But the thing is, right, because she has so low base AD, she has a really, really high like AD ratio on Q. And so she's actually one of the best gold scaling marksmen in the game because she has a 1.2 total AD ratio by auto attacking. Now, okay, sure, there's an attack speed cap, whatever, and like the bullets can miss. Yeah, there's a bunch of other considerations, but it's like, oh, you don't have a normal champion's level of like gain with experience. The durability you gain per level is different from other conventional marksmen. The damage you gain from leveling up is different from other conventional marksmen, and she doesn't have the same nutritional steroids like a Tristana Q or a Jinx Q, where they're like very reliable and kind of always up. It's like, yeah, you're like really, really windowed here. You're really teamfight focused, and your like baseline growth is pretty bad. It's like we can unwind a lot of that. And so step 1 here is really just like some really safe baseline stuff that's like very simple. But I think there is room for a much larger scope change where like she gets back to normal marksman levels of numbers, and we then like get to walk back all of the like very aggressive crit scaling and bonus AD scaling we had given her over time to try to wean her off these Titanic builds. And she can just like, there's probably a really good version here, and like this is unfortunate, and but it's like, this is kind of all the fallout that kind of happens. It's like, wow, we really got to fix these Triforce builds, and like a lot of stuff gets moved around, and they're good for the goal of like, please, like go build crit instead of Triforce. And like it helped. Like there were various points where she was building crit again, and finally like, okay, you know what, we're just gonna kill Sheen. And it feels bad to say that you're supposed to like these items. They make sense in your head. ER is a missed opportunity. I mean, maybe there's a world where it's like Zeri's mana costs are really extreme and you must build Essence Reaver, and Essence Reaver is the only way you can solve your mana problems, and you're not going to go Triforce, you need ER, why would you build both of these? And like that would be another way to maybe try to solve that, and that would be maybe reasonable. I'm not sure, but anyway, there's a lot of possible considerations here, to be clear. There's not like a really obvious, easy, best version forward, but I think, giving her normal marksman stats is a start. It goes in the right direction and is valuable. The other change is just simply giving some flat damage on W. So my theory for what has kept Zeri in pro jail And this theory might be wrong, but this is the theory that I have right now. This is what I've shared. August did these changes. He is Zeri's designer. Is the reason I think Zeri is pro-jailed is that she is a safe, infinite scaling gold scaffolding. So I think this is kind of the same thing we had with the last few times Rise was pro-jailed when he was playing Tank Rise, where games went long enough you could always get 3 items on Rise. He was so tanky, he was unkillable, and he always had enough damage that he was always going to be a very, very good team fighter. And of course, Titanic, Trinity, Shield Bow, Zeri was also this. Trinity or Shield Bow based on, you know, the time of the champion. But where it is right now is like, yeah, Zeri, because her base stats are very bad, all of her scaling is in gold percentages. And by the way, pro teams funnel gold to AD carries way better than other like even elite level games. Like if you look at like average bot laner gold per minute in Challenger to average mid lane gold per minute in Challenger, it's not that far apart. It's like 2%. It's not a lot. If you compare pro play, it's like 20%. It's wild. And if you look at like low elo, AD carries get less gold than solo laners in low elo solo queue. Again, by like 2%, but like, so any marksman who is the best gold scaffolding in League of Legends, unless they are criminally underpowered, is just pro-jailed if you're ever going to play around bot lane. And because Zeri's base stats went into the garbage because of Triforce, all of her powers in gold scaling instead. We kept saying, oh, well, build crit, don't build Titanic, build crit, don't build Triforce, build crit. And of course, right, like the logical conclusion of this is she is the best gold scaffolding, and because her good players are good at landing Qs, so E's cooldown is based around landing more Qs. Well, this means E is 100% uptime for good players, for pro players. And her R, which goes infinite in team fights, like maybe we can keep infinite R, to be clear. Maybe we can keep infinite R and it's actually okay. But the fact that, infinite R, you only have around like 3 seconds to like keep your R up by the time you go through the first durations, from what I recall. So it's like you have to kind of like stay in range pretty aggressively to like keep the stacks. Ruler's good at that. I'm not. And it's like, that's another thing that's like, well, okay, that's mastery. That's kind of okay. Like, to be clear, like her having a mastery curve is fine. That's not a core problem. This is more of a like, there might be a more of a structural issue with like the way that Zeri is constructed as sort of a response to her Trinity Force and Titanic builds that we can unwind and find ourselves in a very good spot where she's totally good. Anyway, this is to talk about partially the AD growth, but also the W damage. Because, as we circle back to it, if Zeri is not, like, the more of Zeri is not just, I'm an auto attacker, right? I Q with my E and R buffs on. The more of Zeri is just like, nah, dude, I press W and like I have some poke, I have some like reliable stuff that I can do when I'm behind a little bit, and I don't have to be ahead and snowballing quite as much. It's okay, you can like weak side me a little bit here. I press his button and I do something kind of cool. Like most of her power should not be in W, but a decent portion of her power can be in W, because like you can't really infinite scale that anyway. You can't like funnel resources into her W being better. It's dodgeable. W's impact scales negatively with MMR. W is a larger portion of her low elo power budget than her high elo power budget in terms of like her total damage output. So this is a tool that's like very clearly low elo skewed, but also the kind of thing where it's like, cool, this makes her not just the auto attack champion. She has other stuff to do. So I think, again, these are both good changes directionally. I think there is definitely some substantial work that can be done to, get Zeri off of the sort of infinite scalar gold scaffolding. And it also could be that my theory is totally wrong here, and there's a much like better solution here for the champion, but I want to get some thoughts. Vel'Koz has 2 bug fixes going into this patch. So the first is a bug with his W, where the way his W works is there's 3 spells. There's the Wrapper spell, Wrapper starting with a W, and it's like, this is what causes everything to happen. But then both stints of damage are their own spells as well. So there's a Wrapper, there's W1, there's W2. W1 was mistakenly flagged to not be castable while dead. And basically the way it works is if you cast regular W, it says here, like, I've laid out the purple carpet, right? Here you go. This is the thing. I have cast W. So for example, Vhagar W works this way. If you press W and instantly die, Vhagar calls out a meteor is falling, and the meteor is falling. The sound effects play, and it's like, no, he put the circle on the ground, the meteor is falling. To be fair, Vhagar E doesn't work this way. Vhagar E, he starts spawning the cage, but he doesn't spawn the cage if he's dead. So it's not consistent per champion. I think I can defend Vhagar W as correct to say I've started the spell, you hear the sound effect, it's going to keep going. I think Vhagar E, again, there's definitely some weird disconnects around, like, the indicator showing with the spell not casting obviously looks very weird. I think we should absolutely try to clean up cases where the indicator shows but the spell's not actually casting is definitely strange. But, you know, Syndra Q is like this, and Vhagar W is like this, where, like, I cast the spell, I might play an animation afterwards to lock me in place, but, like, you know, the particle is going to hit. You know, Xerath W is the opposite of this, where he starts the animation, the warning plays, but if he dies, it doesn't go off. Vhagar E, again, is I play the warning indicator, I die, it doesn't go off. Vel'Koz E, I play the indicator, I die, it doesn't go off. So, like, we are inconsistent here. Vel'Koz W, I think, is one that is reasonable to play this way. To be fair, I actually think Vel'Koz's E indicator maybe shouldn't show until he actually fires the missile. Regardless, that's its own thing, but we are obviously very clearly inconsistent here. This is to say, though, that, like, Vel'Koz W does paint the ground. And the thing that's actually really weird about this one is, so on live right now, if you press W and instantly die, the first W will not deal damage, but W2 will explode. And that's kind of the weird one, right? That, like, okay, clearly it does go off and W2 blows up, but W1 doesn't go through. That's very silly. That's the bug fix. W1 now always fires because W2 always fires. And I think saying that this is like Vhagar W, this is how it works, is reasonable, to be clear. Okay. The other bug fix is an out-of-range error. So Vel'Koz E also has a wrapper, right? So Vel'Koz E1 is a quarter-second long cast time. The E wrapper has a quarter-second long cast time that at the end of the cast fires the missile, and then the missile is its own spell. That's its own spell. It's the missile, and the missile does all the damage and the knockup and everything. And that can do all with logic while he's dead. Doesn't matter, right? That's always been the case. But when you start casting the E wrapper, it puts the indicator on the ground, and then when the spell is done casting, it then tries to fire the missile at that location, right? I start firing the wrapper spell. It says, here's location on the ground. We're gonna drop an indicator, and I'm going to save this location. And then, now that I've finished casting my E wrapper, go fire the E missile. Well, the E missile had a max range, which means if I am far enough away from the marker, I no longer cast that spell anymore. Which is just shouldn't happen this way. This is like if I get buster shotted or I flash or whatever, this missile fires, like, just doesn't fire because it's like, oh, you want to cast there, but that's 1,200 units away. That's not my cast range. My cast range is like 800, I think it is. And it's like, oh, what should really happen is, yeah, I get buster shotted or I flash or whatever. You should still shoot the missile. That should still happen. So the E bug fix is if you flash away, your E still fires because it should. And the W bug fix is if you cast W and then die, you still get W1 damage. You already got the W2 damage. And so this is basically how Vhagar W works. And then this is just the way that the spell should always have worked. And I mean, shout out August for catching these two bugs and finding them. There is some discussion, and we probably will do it, around making short-range Vel'Koz E a more reliable spell and saying, actually, you know what, Vel'Koz, you in fact are just going to be better in melee matchups than you are currently. And even though he's been very weak to melee champs for his entire history as a champion, they could be like, you know what, yes, he's been out for 10 years, but we think it's correct that Vel'Koz has better melee self-peel. Sure, right, kind of direction we can totally make, call we can totally make here. So we might do that in 14.1 or later or something, we'll see. We might put it in the 24B micro patch if it's a very simple change. Either way, the buff there. So that is the patch, that's the rundown. Managed to make it an hour, 20 minutes. I know I spent the first half an hour not talking about the patch itself, spent 50 talking about the patch itself, spent a long time talking about Zeri and whatnot. Hopefully this was entertaining. Hopefully you enjoyed it. Thanks for watching, everyone. See you next time. Bye-bye.